The next few days, I much preferred my own company and stuck to going to the office and returning straight home. After work, it was now time to see if this experience linked up with what the Bible said about God. About God, creation, and everything else. One thing that was clear, however, was that I had never been so clear about things. It was like the experience removed every bit of doubt and skepticism in my mind. My comprehension appeared enhanced, and I would break into a sudden laugh or shed a tear in the middle of doing something, simply because I could have punched myself for not seeing it the way God explained it. I felt like an idiot whose spiritual senses had been dulled by this world. I now understood that the term "in the beginning" did not apply to God, as he had no beginning, because if it did, he would also have to have an end. That would refute the concept of divine infinity completely, but the term simply referred to everything that God created and not to God himself. That's why it did not read "from the beginning," but "in the beginning." So my mind told me that it was God who began the beginning, and therefore could not have also been part of that beginning. He must have been outside and independent of the process of the beginning, since it was well documented that he was from everlasting to everlasting. It was quite clear that this was the only option available, and that the laws of nature and the universe did not apply to him, although he was the one who set them in place. They were given and set in place for his creation to follow and obey. How we didn't understand this is actually quite comical now, because we know that the automobile company Mercedes-Benz, for example, did not begin to exist at the exact moment its first vehicles were made. The process of creating and planning its first products must have been there before the birth of its first car rolling off the production line. Therefore, the laws pertaining to the vehicle and its use were drawn up by the pre-existent automobile company for the car and not for the creator of the vehicle. This is because Mercedes-Benz, the company, is not a car, but it manufactures cars. Just like God is not a man, but he created men. I also appear to have grasped the concept of what eternal meant, even if over the years it may have become slightly blurred whenever my prayer life or spiritual walk waned for some reason or other. Eternal simply meant without time. In other words, God existed before anything else came into being. So to simplify this means that before there were rivers, mountains, humans, planets, galaxies, and other still yet to be discovered places, there was only God, who filled everywhere. Everything we now see was in him, as scripture teaches. Your favorite part of the world and all the things that make it special did not exist. There was only God, in his majesty and full glory. There was even no place where he lived or dwelt, because he was every place. This is what the term omnipresence of God meant. Very often we make it sound as if God can pop up everywhere at the same time, which is only partially true. But he doesn't have to pop up anywhere, because simply put, he is everywhere at the same time. I know many of our minds still grapple with this, because our human thinking is shaped by the laws of the universe, which are time, space, and distance. We are wired this way. But for the days straight after this vision or dream, I understood it succinctly. What was also imprinted in my mind was the fact that I had nothing to do with this new understanding or comprehension I now had. It was none of my work nor of my intelligence, but had been revealed by being in God's presence. I finally understood what the Apostle Paul meant when he wrote that now we know in part, but will know in full as we ourselves are known when we get to heaven. In his presence you will also be aware that he knows your every secret and everything about you, even your faults. It is impossible to hide anything from God. An overwhelming sense of love, unlike any you have experienced, surrounds and permeates you as the creator of your soul stares at you with eyes filled with infinity's love. You can't help but just begin to weep, no matter how grown and adult you may be. Whilst many among us are more focused on the color of his eyes, my biggest takeaway was the fact that even though you could not look into his eyes directly, your spirit translated to you the information about his eyes, which were filled with immense tenderness and divine love for his creations. I had never ever felt so loved before. A preacher once asked me if I really didn't have any secrets I kept from God, and I confirmed it. He asked me how was this possible since we are all afraid of his judgment. I explained that God's love, which we experience when in his presence, does not condemn us but seeks to save us and reassure us that the Father loves us. By now I was beginning to understand that to think one could hide anything from God was to display scriptural ignorance, for it is written that he is the one to whom we must all give account for our deeds. If we must give account to him, that means he knows. It also came into my spirit that when we think we can hide something from him, we are in fact saying he is not omniscient, meaning he is not all-knowing. This means that we do not think that he can see or knows everything about every one of us. That would be to strip him of his power and making him like us with our limited knowledge. In fact, I once called this the process of de-godding God, when I couldn't find a more appropriate term to articulate it. I hope no one has an issue with that. I meant that it was like we unrobe the King of Kings or even strip him of his glory when we assume we can conceal something from him. It is impossible to hide anything from the Almighty Creator. Just ask Cain, who killed his brother with no witnesses present. Or check up on Moses, killing an Egyptian thinking no one had seen him do it. God spoke to Cain saying, "Your brother's blood is calling to me from the grave." Moses was so shocked when God told him that he saw him kill the Egyptian. He was so shocked that he fled, living his privileged life as a prince in Pharaoh's palace, terrified that someone had seen him. So God knows your every thought and sentiment. He knows everything that is in your heart every time. If he didn't, it would mean that his knowledge is limited, and in fact, if it were so, may I venture to say that it would not be God. All definitions of his power and might throughout the ages have included the fact that God is almighty and all-knowing always. That is why I make it my business to open up my heart to him every night before I lay my head down to rest. I speak openly to my Creator, telling him about everything unscriptural that I did or that came into my head during the day. I ask him to wash me clean and forgive me where I erred or sinned. I have no intentions of ever hiding anything from God, even if it is something terrible I did, said or thought. God forbid. That is actually the time I really need his forgiveness and guidance. Many people make the mistake of thinking they can conceal their sinful conduct or thinking from God, but in doing so, they give sin an opportunity to breed more sin, as scripture teaches that everything gives birth to more of its kind if left unaddressed. It is not possible to hide anything from God. So from today, reserve a portion of your prayer time every night before going to bed to speak to him about everything you went through or did, including and especially where you did not obey his laws. It will set you free, and he will guide you back to righteousness by his Spirit and his word. An open and honest heart that acknowledges God's sovereignty and power is pleasing unto the Lord, not one that foolishly imagines it has the power to hide anything from the Creator of the universe. There are even more people like Ananias and Sapphira who also thought they could hide secrets from God. We all know the story of what happened to them. God is love, and in John 3:17 scripture tells us emphatically that he has not sent his Son into the world to condemn it, but to save it. Another issue that fascinated me was the way he started the monologue. He said, "So you want to know who I am and where I come from?" Straight to the point with no faffing around, just the way I like it. There was no small talk because he already knew everything about me, just like he knows everything about you. After all, we are his children whom he designed. His tone, whilst filled with love and tenderness, was also authoritative without being dictatorial. I interpreted his demeanor as being pleased at the interest I had shown in scriptural issues, yet he also made sure that the distance between us as we walked on this road was kept by some invisible force, and the force that prevented me from seeing his face was still in full effect. The fact that God came to answer my concerns and questions still makes me get teary-eyed and goosebumps. This is the Creator that we are speaking about here. And to think He knew exactly where I live and had no need to ask anyone for my address. I'm no big prophet or pastor, nor was I even saved yet at the time. But that was apparently not important to Him. He also could have summoned any of His millions of angels to come and answer me. At first I did actually gravitate towards thinking it was an angel as I made my way up towards Him. But He debunked that with His opening line when He said, "So you want to know who I am and where I come from." This teaches me that God is indeed no respecter of persons, people. As the Bible teaches, to Him every soul is precious and special. I felt so honored for months afterwards, and even today, 25 years later. I'm choked with emotion when I regale this tale, including now. I'm also still startled by the fact that God can walk into our dreams and our sleep and call our spirits towards Himself whilst our physical bodies remained in bed. The thought did spring up that I needed to read up a little on sleep and the mind's activities in the different stages just to make sure I was not hallucinating, as some said. But after familiarizing myself with the facts, even on delta sleep, it became clear that I was actually not fully asleep during this experience and that my spirit was sucked out of my body and left the room to go up and receive the answers to the questions I had asked. It was the opposite of the response I got from the New Apostolic Church priest. I asked almost the same questions. I felt like he was saying, "Who are you to ask God to explain Himself?" For a while I felt really bad at what I did. But then a scripture I read in the book of Isaiah said, "Come, let us reason together." It was God inviting man to come and state his case. I also did not recall Jesus ever castigating anyone who came to ask Him a question. Even Nicodemus, a leader and teacher in Israel, was answered by the Messiah. But sadly, even today, when the curious and new converts have questions to ask, they are often made to feel like they have no right to do so. That ought not to be so. I had to deal with the little anger I was feeling at the priest's response to questions God Himself saw fit to respond to. Surely He was not greater than God. To me, it was plain common sense, though, because if someone asks you to leave your life and follow them into the unknown, that is not a small ask. It's not like you have another life to give to someone else should you discover you made a mistake. So I felt justified to ask the question. The least they could do is explain where we are heading to. But many insecure leaders see these kind of questions as an attempt to show them up, or they assume the person is trying to be smart. Perhaps some do have those intentions, but even then, it is an opportunity to win a soul. If we don't know the answers when someone has these kind of questions, it's okay. This knowledge is obtainable from God, and there are many different books on these issues. So we can simply explain to them that we don't know the answers to the questions, but we'll get back to them after reading up on it. It is also a great opportunity to invite them to a Bible study and cover the same questions, where even others can share their revelations of what this means, and we could also answer the same questions others had but were too afraid to ask. There are so many lessons this experience in His presence taught me that I would need a few years to dissect it fully. I pray God will grant me the grace and time to do it soon.